Well, greetings, everybody. Welcome once again to the Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Fredland. And as you guys know, our goal with SSB is to guide small business owners from chaos to confidence through information, connection, and coaching. But these successes are only part of our story. They're part of our vision. Because as small business owners thrive, the economy and the vitality of their community increases. So we've seen it. Individual success leads to communities revitalize and re-energize. And this is the movement that we are trying to fuel throughout the world. So check it out at smallbusiness.com. Today, super excited, chatting with Dr. Stanley Ward. We're going to be talking a bit about not trying to do everything yourself. So I'm super excited to get into this because this is something that I'm struggling with myself. So let's welcome him in, Dr. Stanley Ward.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity, Steve. I'm excited about getting to share with your audience today.
Now, where are you joining us from?
Yes, so this is Tyler, Texas is where I'm at. As we were mentioning earlier, you're up in Minnesota, those beautiful northern woods, and our weather conditions are very different. We also have, I'm in East Texas, and so there's a lot of pine trees and pine thickets, and it's also hilly, and there are lakes, but man, it's hot and humid right now.
Yeah, you're telling me what, it's 70 or 60 to 80% humidity and 95 degrees or something?
Yeah.
Sounds lovely. I mean,
Yeah. If you enjoy saunas that you can't escape, then you're going to love this.
So you come up and visit me in the summer and you go down and visit Stanley down in the winter.
That's really it. Yeah. We were just talking about my friends from Minneapolis, and they come to visit us in March because they need a break. And then we try to go visit them in the summer because we need a break. Now,
forgive me if I'm off base, but it sounds like you're been in Texas for a while. Is that where you're originally from?
So I grew up in Oklahoma, and small town Oklahoma. So I appreciate this whole small business thing, the emphasis here. I've seen it downtown Pryor, Oklahoma. That's where I grew up, population about 9,000. I often tell people Oklahomans are some of the nicest people you'll meet because it's the only natural resource we have. Moved to Texas in 91. Actually, I was a camp director for several years. So I came down here to start working for a camp full time, and that's what relocated me.
Nice. Okay. So what are you doing now? What's your background? We're a doctor, we're a PhD. So I'm curious what that's all about, and then kind of how you've been spending your time recently.
Okay. Yeah. I'm a doctor, but I can't prescribe anything. And unless it's an existential emergency, then I'm pretty good at that.
Can you prescribe wisdom?
Yeah. Yeah, I can lead you to water, but I can't make you drink.
Right.
So I am currently a leadership coach. I've been doing that since 2011. I'm also an online professor. I teach leadership studies. I've written a textbook on ethical leadership, and my latest book is a practitioner book on how to beat burnout for yourself, your family, and your team. That's what connected us when we talk about not doing everything yourself. And I work primarily with folks who want to experience success both at work and at home. And I describe my work not so much as work-life balance, but really as work-life success. And so it's a understanding that there are relational skills and thinking skills that leaders need so they can succeed in both spheres. And so those are the skills we develop, and we make them stick.
Love it so much. So let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, I warned you, who knows where the conversation will go. We'll bring you in to talk about some things, but I get so intrigued by some of this. And this idea of work-life success is a very intriguing thing. And it sounds like a little bit of a paradigm shift, a little bit. So maybe talk a little bit about, balance, success in these things, but coupled with this idea that I think small business owners are so focused on, I've got to be the person just driving, doing. And I feel like it almost becomes like this identity issue, right? Like it's more, a lot of small business owners and leaders will say, I don't want to work all these hours, but yet when given the choice, they do. And so I'm kind of curious, how should people start framing this up, or how do you direct people to start framing up this idea of work-life success?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things at work here. One is to think about, what are my success metrics? If we're not careful, and I'm in the same space, I mean, I'm a solopreneur right now, and I've been working remote as a solopreneur for years. So I get it. I mean, you're in my world headquarters right now, my 6x6 world
right,
headquarters.
And you're in mine. This is fantastic.
Yeah, influence coaching. Here we are.
Right, love it.
But it literally is a world headquarters because thanks to the internet and the things possible. I mean, yesterday was working with a client in Ireland, of all places. So to your question of work-life success. So let's start with success metrics and being really clear on what those are. As a solopreneur and a person who does have some drive, I compare myself, and I talk about this in the book as well, to a pole vaulter who, it's like I'm getting up to the bar and I'm about to go over it, and I go, gosh, if I can get over this must not be challenging enough. So I'm going to hold on to the pole with this hand, reach out to the bar with this one, raise it while I'm in midair, right? Then I'll feel like I've really accomplished something. Well, how's that going to work? So I have to manage that side of myself a lot. The other metaphor I'll use is, if you're familiar with Big League Chew, it was a gum, bubble gum. Yep. When I was a kid, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. Yeah. So the art on the cover, I call that guy Big League Jimmy. And so I say there's a Big League Jimmy in me. He always feels like he's got to swing for the fences. And I have to manage that guy because, again, he will just wear me out. So the first step is, let's get clear on what are those core values, the things you really care about. Let's define what success really is for you. And then once we're clear on that, we can start working out the details. But if we don't do that, what ends up happening is success is defined for us by other people, and they're people who don't necessarily have our best interests in mind. Or success is defined by the sense of just more. And if more, a constant sense of more is how we define success, you're setting yourself up for burnout, because that's just not sustainable. As human beings, we're built to go through cycles of exertion and recovery, And as long as we stay in those cycles, we can stay healthy, we can get a lot of things done, and we can grow our businesses. It's when we try to stay in a constant state of exertion that we're in trouble. If we're willing to change the oil in our car engines every 3,000 to 6,000 miles, why aren't we willing to maintain ourselves?
That's so good. I've got a million questions out of that thing. This is just really, really good already. But, the idea of core values and metrics, I think you're right on that. People just don't have those. At least the folks that I've been coaching, they think they maybe have them, or if pressed, they'll come up with something. But it's sort of that when you start asking that second question, that's when there's just lack of clarity. They really don't know what they're ultimately trying to do. And, I was coaching somebody, and I said, you're sort of a why not kind of guy. As we started coaching, as I'd ask him, well, why did you do this? Why do that? And he's like, well, kind of why not? Even though if pressed, he'll say, well, I want to work less hours and make more money. The decision-making wasn't aligned to that. So talk a little bit more about that. Like, how do you get clarity? So, people, I think everybody says, I want to make more money and I want to work less hours, but how do you really get clarity on what those success metrics are? Is there a process? Is it surrounding yourself with, a coach or something? Or how do you recommend people do that?
Yeah, again, let me use some metaphors and then we'll get into some practical stuff. As far as metaphors go, think about, do I have a spotlight for success or a laser beam? Right? Because a laser beam is highly focused and it's a more powerful application of light. So we want to have a laser beam focused goal. That helps, number one. And you're right, a coach can be tremendously helpful in taking you through the process of getting clarity on what that is. And there are so many tools now on the internet and various personality assessments, value assessments. I'm thinking of things like the VIA Strengthsfinder actually deals with character strengths. I've got a resource I'm happy to share with your listeners on clarifying core values.
Yeah.
Thinking through things like this Gallup Strengthsfinder, where you get clear on, all right, what are the things that really energize me that I can depend on? And we want to come back to the Strengthsfinder, by the way, when we start really investigating what it looks like to work with others. Any of those things can help you get a better sense of who you are at your best, what you want to achieve. I think ultimately it's about picturing the life you want. And I mean, really the life you really, really want. So if I'm not careful, I'm going to default to some sort of weird Pinterest, Instagram, living on the beach in Hawaii thing as the goal. The reality is I'm kind of a homebody. I don't really need that to feel successful. As much as I hate to admit it, I don't really need a new car to feel successful. For me, success is grilling on my back porch, right? Success is the fact that I'm teaching my daughters to appreciate 80s music. you know, or we'll be in the, I'm also a big Beatles fan. I taught myself to play guitar when I was 16. I bought a guitar and a Beatles songbook. So,
Nice.
you know, we'll play the name that Beatle game as we're driving down the road and listening to an album or listening to a Beatles song comes on.
Now that's raising your kids right.
Yeah. Core values, man. Core values.
Right.
You know, the kind of relationship I have with my spouse, my wife, those things are really important to me. And I'm not saying it's that or material success, but what's the life package that's going to help me develop that fruit, if you will? What's the soil? What are the raw materials I need for that to happen? And then taking action steps to get that in place. And so that's why I talk about work-life success. There are skills that will help us focus both at work and at home. There are relationship skills in defining boundaries or communication skills that work in both places remarkably well.
I love that. And it's sort of like this optimization. Sorry, I'm a nerd. I'm an actuary by trade. So, sort of this optimization, right? I mean, we talk about work and success, success at work and success at home. And, there's only marginal, amounts of benefit you gain once you reach a certain level at something, but you're sacrificing something else that might mean more to you. I mean, you're sacrificing grilling on Saturday to make an extra 10 grand a year. Is that worth it? For some people, maybe it is, maybe it's not, but you have to be intentional about that. And I love what you shared about sort of the default. I talk about that a lot, that, we accept life by default. This default living is sort of what we take from our parents or our society or community. And what I'm hearing from you is really there's an intentionality behind living the best life that you can live. And only you can define that, right? I mean, that's sort of what I hear in your message, but you have to be intentional about that.
Yeah. And I would even say you in community get to define that.
Nice.
Because I'm convinced, I used to be a humanities teacher years and years ago. And one of the things I learned teaching humanities classes when I was in graduate school was that the basic difference between a tragic story and a comic story is not that one is happy and the other is sad. Comic stories end in community, tragic stories end in isolation. And so as I work with clients and even work in my own life, I'll ask myself, what kind of story am I telling here? Am I telling a comic story or a tragic one? Because I really want to choose the comic story. So you're going to find success for yourself, but I would encourage you to do it in community. I'm thinking about a family member who struggled with addiction issues, and at one point was just saying, I just want you to leave me alone. Okay, that family member was defining success, but it wasn't in community, right? And so they were going off into the tragic abyss, to kind of circle back to this humanities language.
So how do, these small business owners, many of them are scrambling a million miles an hour, and people know who they are, and they know who a lot of people are. They have a lot of acquaintances, but they do struggle with sort of those deeper friendships, the intimate friendships, or the deeper community. They belong by title to a community, but I think they do feel very isolated, very lonely, which might surprise a lot of people that aren't business owners. So how do they start to move out of that or recognize that they need a deeper sense of community?
Okay. So there's two questions there. One is, how do they recognize the need? And then the second is, how do they move out of that? So which one do you want to deal with?
Let's say move out of it. I'm going to assume that the people out there still listening are the folks that are saying, you know what, that resonates with me. I think I need to surround myself with the right people in community. So what do I do? How do I start taking that step?
Yeah. And so for me as a business owner, what that looks like is I look for people of character and competence. And if I can trust you because of both your character and your competence, I just listen. And I ask you for advice. I take that advice, unless it's obviously flawed in some way. I just trust that and I work with it. And that alone takes a lot of the burden, a lot of the weight and feeling alone to me, because basically, rather than just, using this thing, I've got a multitude of advisors and resources that I can tap into. Because again, going back to the Gallup Strengthsfinder work, there are some things I'm really good at, and there's some things I'm really weak at. When I work with clients, I'll talk about strengths, weaknesses, and liabilities. And so strengths are the things that you can count on under pressure, under stress. They energize you. Weaknesses are those things that are less than ideal. Liabilities are the weaknesses that hurt us.
Mm-hmm.
And so learning how to say, okay, I'm going to correct the liabilities. I'm going to make peace with the weaknesses, and I'm going to lean into my strengths. And one of the ways I do that is by identifying people in my circle of influence who have strengths in areas where I either have liabilities or weaknesses, and I build relationships with those folks intentionally.
Love it. And you talked about the Strengthsfinder quite a bit. That's something that's been near and dear to my heart a bit. And I want you to address that for people. I'm a learner, relator, strategic, assurant, self-assurant. That's sort of my strengths. And the reason I share that is because I was going through a really difficult time in my job years ago. Talked to a mentor about it. And he said, well, when you switched jobs, you actually lost using your strengths. You're actually grieving losing your strengths. I was doing a great job, but I wasn't learning. I wasn't relating. I wasn't achieving. I wasn't being strategic. And so talk a little bit about that or other tools, because I think there can be a standoffishness toward tools like that, because people think, oh, it's a psychological babble. It's shrinking my brain. It's like, there's no value in it. Maybe talk a little bit about that or other tools on how that can actually benefit you as a person and lead you to make the decisions that are aligned to who you are. Maybe encourage people to take that step and become more self-aware.
Yeah. So again, I like to use metaphors, and so, or similes. So think of all these tools as ways to identify the raw material in your life, because we know that some raw material will handle certain loads better than other raw materials, right? In other words, I don't want to build a bridge out of clay. Might be good to build it out of stone or steel, right? And so essentially what these tools can help us do is make us aware of, okay, here's the raw material I have. Now, what do I want to build with that?
Love that. Okay. So have you encountered people that have been kind of resistant toward figuring out their raw materials?
Oh, sure.
And so how do you encourage them to kind of get over that hump?
Yeah, well, sometimes it helps just sharing that analogy that I just did to reframe it so it seems less threatening or it seems more useful. But ultimately, they choose. It's their story, not mine. And so I think some personalities enjoy being self-aware. Some personalities find that to be a threat. And so challenge by choice. Either you want that awareness or you don't.
Yeah, I love it. And I think that's the true coach in you coming out right there. Like, you're not going to own it more than they are.
Yeah, it's just exhausting. I've been in the other space where I want it more than the other person does, and I don't have the energy for it. I'm now a middle-aged man. I can't pull that load. Speaking of raw material,
I'm the same way. Same way, 30 years in the corporate world, you're always kind of the one having the answers or being the consultant, so to speak. And you start coaching with people and you realize, okay, I can't own this more than you do. If you don't really want to make the change, the horse to water thing.
Yeah.
So true. I want to get back to a little bit about the exertion recovery. We've covered so much ground, and I know I've been all over the place here, but back to the exertion recovery thing. I think that's, that idea of doing one, then the other, and kind of ebbing and flowing. And that's a natural rhythm for our human existence. But I think so many of us get wrapped up into, okay, the recovery will come later, and it's always later. It's going to be later. It's going to be later. Why? What are the downfalls? What are the pitfalls of falling into that trap?
Yeah. So again, adding a metaphor for you. So have you ever had the experience of running an engine after it's run out of oil?
Okay, sure.
There's your answer.
There's your answer. Okay.
How'd that go for you? Right.
So you're saying I should go pick up some 30 weight at the store? Is that what you're telling me to do?
Yeah, metaphorically, yeah. I guess I am prescribing something as a doctor today. I'm prescribing oil.
Oil.
Again, understanding that as human beings, we need cycles of rest and recovery, and then understanding what those options are. So it's not that I'm going to work hard and then my rest phase is I'm going to go fly to Hawaii and have a month of vacation. Mm-hmm. It can be as simple as I'm going to purposefully schedule a 30-minute lunch break where I'm going to turn off my phone and I'm just going to sit and enjoy my meal, or I'm going to purposefully schedule an appointment with a client that I just really enjoy. I'm going to give myself a little extra time there because there's energy that comes from that. What we're trying to do is put energy back into the system, so we're not just exerting ourselves all the time. And there's a lot of ways to do that.
So what sort of testimonials have you received from people who have kind of figured this out? Maybe, through your coaching or your book or whatever else, where they've been going and always kind of said, yep, I will enter a recovery phase. Next year, I'm going to recovery phase. And the next year, but then there are people that eventually figure that out and they're actually in a healthy cycle. What have you heard from those folks?
Well, the first thing that came to mind is kind of a funny story. A friend of mine, who is in law and was practicing from home because of the COVID stuff. And he was reading my book and he basically said, okay, Dr. Stan says I can go take a nap. And he let himself do that. And his wife was reflecting on just, man, he's like a different guy in how he experiences his work, because that working from home was really throwing him. I am thinking of a call I had with a person this morning where we talk about this idea of, for him, it's almost like we were taking friction out of the system, removing resistance. And so simply by doing these things that removed resistance, and it can be as simple as just allowing yourself to breathe, to really breathe. And forgive me if this seems overplayed, because at least in my world, we talk about this kind of stuff a lot, right? But this idea of actually breathing down into your belly, deep diaphragmatic breathing rather than the shallow chest breathing that's associated with stress. Just, again, several client conversations focus on this idea of rest and then act, or relax and act. So just taking the 7 seconds to go in for 3, out for 4, kind of helps reset some of this stuff back here, get us back toward the parasympathetic state, and go back to work.
I love that. It seems so simple, but I've heard that over and over and over again, that same idea of just sort of regrounding yourself, right?
Yes. And again, physician heal thyself. I mean, this is stuff that I believe in because I have to work on it. I get so focused. I get so caught up in what I'm doing. Sometimes I literally forget to breathe. Yeah. And so my wife or daughter, my daughter's like, Dad, breathe. My wife's, Dan, breathe. Like, oh yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel it, man. This is all so personal to me. It's kind of the world that I'm in over the last couple of years since going out on my own, where, I left a very good job and I'm trying to make ends meet and try to, look under every rock for anybody that'll pay me to do anything. And you're like, and you're trying to build a foundation and all of those things. And I think I fall into that unhealthy, I know I fall into that unhealthy cycle of, okay, I think in 3 months, I'm going to be able to take a weekend off or that kind of thing. And I know it's unhealthy, but yet it feels like I can't do it. Like, I know what you're saying, Stanley. I know what other people have said. I know I should. And it just feels like it's another should I should do. And it's another thing I'm missing and I'm not doing quite right because of whatever. And so how do you get people over that hump, like that are really people like me that are saying, okay, I know I should do it. I know, but I can't. You don't know what I'm going through. How do you, and I know you're not, people have to do it themselves, but how do you encourage people to, or what sort of, another analogy or whatever, what is it that helps people kind of break through and actually say, okay, I actually am better. I'm a better leader on the other side of that rhythm.
Yeah. A couple things. One is I just got to say, stop shooting on yourself. Right.
I love that phrase. Yeah. I know. Thank you. I need to hear that.
Yeah. I think that alone helps take a little bit of this pressure off. Again, I think part of this is let's redefine what it means to rest and refresh, that there are a lot of small intentional steps you can take that can help to shift the energy. Because the bottom line is, if you run out of energy, you're not benefiting anyone. If you essentially think of the difference between worn out and burnout. Worn out is that car engine, going back to the car engine that's out of gasoline. It stops.
Mm-hmm.
You refuel it, it can go again. Things work, you get business done. The car engine that runs out of oil, unfortunately, it can keep running even though it's out of the resource it needs. But in the process, it damages itself. And if that goes on long enough, right, it either it either ceases to function entirely, or it could even destroy itself. And we see that with some of the darker parts of burnout. There are cases where it can lead to suicide.
Yeah. So how do I know if I'm almost out of oil? Like, I mean, check the dipstick. But I mean, like, that's sort of, I think a lot of us are in that mode of, okay, well, I'm not there yet. I know I've been just cranking for years here, but I don't think I'm there yet. Are there warning signs, or what should we be doing to kind of check the oil?
Yeah. So what we know about burnout, and this goes back to some research going back to the 1980s, there's really 3 dimensions to it. Emotional exhaustion, again, where you worked and you're out of gas and you're still trying to keep working. Depersonalization, which is a disconnect from people and purpose. Again, why it's so important you not do this on your own. Depersonalization. And the third is a sense of ineffectiveness, lack of accomplishment. Okay. All of us are on the spectrum somewhere on those 3. And it's a question of, am I in a place where I am able to take care of my business and my family the way I want to or not? When these 3 start interfering with what you want for your business and your family, okay, it's time to take action. And that's going to look a little different for everybody.
That's so good. So I think what happens in some cases are, we start to experience burnout, whether it's to that degree or whatever, but in some degree. And then I think that does become our identity. I think I've seen it, people that haven't always had that, now they start owning a business and it sort of becomes their identity. Like, hey, what's going on? I'm just so busy. And they might be, but it feels like that's all we talk about. And I feel like, is there a hurdle then once we shift to having burnout be our lead identity, that it makes it harder to get out of? Or what advice do you have for people that are maybe sensing that's who they are?
Yeah. So one, check your assumptions about what is success and what leads to success. Mm-hmm. And I know I struggle with this as well. There are seasons where I have felt like if I'm not working, everything's going to fall apart.
Right.
Okay. If that's the assumption you're working with, that's a red flag.
Mm-hmm.
It's true when you're a small business owner. If you're not working, there are consequences, but it may not be that everything's going to fall apart. And it may be that you're going to be just fine. One of the things I've had to do for myself is start kind of setting some daily goals of, okay, when I hit these certain metrics, I'm just going to give myself permission to rest. I've done what I need to do for the day.
I love it. And checking your assumptions, sometimes that's hard to do by yourself. That's where a spouse, a friend, a coach comes in.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, I'll be glad to, I've got a document I'd be glad to share with your listeners on, I call it the assumption assassin or the belief buster.
Love it.
Is a way to just help you become more aware. And then once you're aware, what do you desire to do about it? What do you need to know in order to be effective? What skills do you need to have? And then finally, how can you reinforce that? That's how you make sustainable change.
And it feels like part of this is also, we need to give ourselves permission, right? To do this.
Yeah. Like my friend gave himself permission to take a nap.
Yeah.
I've had to give myself permission to say, once I hit these metrics, I've done what I need to do for the day. And now I can go enjoy the benefits of being a small business owner, which means I can go ride my bicycle if I want to, although not in the heat of Texas during the day.
Right. Yeah. Good luck with that.
Yeah. Or, I can take a nap. I can go do something with my family. The reasons I'm in business, I can enjoy those things and give myself permission to do that.
And what I'm hearing over this whole thing is it's so much of this just comes back to clarity. Who do you want to be? What is success to you really? Roll up your sleeves and really dig in. And I feel like then decisions sort of follow themselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah. To say, what is it I really want? Okay.
Yeah.
What's the biggest challenge? How can I take action on that challenge? And then that just gets you a step closer to what you really want. And you reiterate that process, and that's how you make progress.
Love it. So don't try to do everything yourself. is part of what we're talking about. So we're talking about the burnout, all these things that can happen all the time. But how do we? Is delegation an issue for some people, or the
Oh, it's
sense that
huge.
I
Yeah.
need to do this myself, like I'm the only one that can or should or can effectively talk a little bit about how do we start to maybe offload the burden that we have?
Yeah. So I have a resource called Moving from a Star Player to Team Leader. So one, let's talk about that idea. What we know about leadership skills, and this goes back to some research in the 1950s. It's a model that I find really helpful. Think about all of our skills as leaders can be divided into one of three buckets. So essentially there's the technical bucket that's about just getting stuff done. Then there's the relational bucket about how we work with people. And then there is the conceptual bucket, how we work with ideas, our thinking habits, things like that. So what happens is our early successes are built on or based on our ability to simply get stuff done, working out of the technical bucket. But as our businesses grow, as we gain more influence, or as we go up in an organization, the relational and conceptual become even more important. The problem is, unless someone tells us that, we assume that what made us successful before will keep making us successful. So we double down on that. And then when things don't work out the way we want them to, we think, oh, I just need to work harder. So then we work even harder at that thing. And then you get this really ugly feedback loop going.
Oh, that's so good. I mean, I think that describes so many people, and even in small businesses, right? As, okay, I'm really good at roofing houses, so that's what I do and do and do and do, and then it grows and grows and grows, and so now I've got to roof more and more and more and more and more, and don't realize that, yeah, there's actually a way to work, to become a business leader, or whatever you said, a team leader, rather than a star player.
Yeah, and the delegation piece, if you are the most capable person in your business, you're in trouble.
Love that. And it sounds so, I mean, I've heard that, and I believe it and I buy into it, but I think it's so hard for us to, as small business owners, to get out of that mindset. Maybe in the
because
corporate
that's
world,
what made us
easier.
successful, right? That's what got us. That's what got us to this place. And as Marshall Goldsmith says, what got you here won't get you there.
So good. And that's what we want our people to come up and be the star players. We want them to do all of that, and set them up for success, as well as freeing up our plate a little bit as well.
If you're a roofer and your vision of success is not being on top of roofs all day long working, then it's not in your best interest to be the best guy at what you do with roofing, right? You need other people who are as good or better. And so what are the things you need to do, leader, in order to make that happen? Start taking those actions. And yeah, it takes time. And I'll tell you, you're going to experience a dip in performance at first, right? Because you're using skills you haven't used before. It's like trying to write with your opposite hand. But if you'll push through the dip, then whoosh, things can take off.
And I think, I'm experiencing that with, for the first time having a virtual assistant, and how do I utilize that? And I just have to recognize there's going to be productivity dips for a while. And I have to make those investments, but that's the same kind of thing, right? Anytime you hire somebody new or whatever to take on some of your workload, you have to realize that's part of the deal. And our role is then to coach them to be successful.
Yes. And to think about, what do I want this to look like in 6 months? What are the actions I need to take to get there? Versus, oh, this thing blew up today, I'll handle it myself because I can handle it better than anybody else.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's just trust. I mean, again, this idea of not doing things by yourself. I think the biggest hurdle for folks to delegate is not so much they don't know how to delegate, although some of that's true. The biggest hurdle is a lack of trust, which is why you surround yourself with people of character and competence, and then it's easier to trust.
So true. And just I just love how much intentionality there is in everything that you're saying, but it still comes back to, what are you trying to do? Why are you hiring a person? Why are you doing that? What are you ultimately trying to do? And then where do you see yourself in 6 months? And then what steps do we need to take? And like you said, trusting these people that are have character and competence. I love it so much. So let's we're starting to wind down. I could literally talk to you for 10 hours, but I do want to respect your time. So let's talk. You've hinted at the book, but we haven't actually talked about it directly. Talk a little bit about some of the resources that you've created that people could take advantage of.
Sure. So the book is How to Beat Burnout for Yourself, Your Family, and Your Team. It works on the assumption that you're a person who cares deeply about both others and your business. And so because of that, it sort of sets you up for burnout, right? And so the first thing is learning how to give yourself permission for self-care. Self-care can feel selfish, But once I realized this self-care is about not just me, but it's about my team, my business, and it's about my family, that motivates me in a different way. That sets up success metrics in a different way. And so the book is a discussion of essentially what burnout is, like we've already talked about, and then what are small experiments you can use to help you move away from emotional exhaustion or move away from depersonalization, to move away from ineffectiveness.
It's so good. And so you're a leadership coach, you do all this other stuff, you're a writer. So people want to connect with you. They say, all right, I'm sold. I need this guy. Okay, I don't just need some of this stuff. I need to actually work with Stanley, or my team needs to work with Stanley, or I need to at least connect with him and keep apprised of what's going on. How do they do that?
Yeah, I love to share resources. So you can go to stanleyjward.com and there's a contact form. Let's connect there. And you can also go to Amazon, just search for Stanley J Ward, and you'll see books I've written there. Those are probably the two best ways to do that.
I love it. And so as we wrap up, what are some of the things that that we haven't talked about today that you're like, man, we need to make sure that people hear this. I know, I'm pretty organic with how we do this. We say, hey, come on, let's talk about this. Then we just kind of go wherever the conversation goes, or whatever I need personally to hear from my life. But there might be, a thing or two that maybe you're like, okay, this is something that these small business leaders need to hear that maybe we didn't have a chance to cover today.
Yeah, I'm reflecting on our conversation, and I think that last point about trust, I would encourage your listeners to think about, okay, where are the relationships where there are people I really trust, and how am I being intentional with those relationships, or where do I need to build those relationships? Because that really will take some of the load off your back.
Love it. And if you're out there listening going, okay, I want to do that, but I'm not really sure how, you can reach out to me. I'm happy to walk you through that and help you, ask you a few questions and help you get there, but be intentional. Don't let this time kind of bypass you and you don't make any change. This is just too good of wisdom for all of you leaders out there to just kind of let sit on a shelf. So take some action, do one thing. And maybe that's my challenge to you, Stanley, is what's the one thing people should do out of this thing? If they hear it all, like it's all really good, but they're going to leave it and not do anything. Is it breathing? Is it trusting? Is it delegate? Like what's kind of give us the one thing, if you can boil it down, that you're saying everyone that heard this should do this now?
I'm going to give you a metaphor and I'm going to give you a practice.
Love it.
The metaphor is choose the comic story. And the practice is, to breathe so that you can relax and then act.
Love it. Well, there he is, Stanley Ward. Thank you so much for your time today. This is fantastic. Make sure you connect with him. As you guys know, the SSB podcast is brought to you by the Small Business Community. Check it out, smallbusiness.com. And if you are part of a community that's ready to get revitalized through a revolution in your small business, reach out to us. In many places, there's now an abundance of funding that can help with training. We do mini MBA sessions, masterminds, coaching. So we can connect and maybe get involved in your community and help transform the downtown area or whatever through working with your small businesses. So if you need any help with anything, reach out to me, Steve at stevefredlin.com. Otherwise, we'll chat with you next time. Thanks.